Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Deb. So, yeah, I moved to Pennsylvania in 2004. A wonderful PhD advisor took a chance on me, Professor Brittingham, and that just happened to be the time that the second Pennsylvania Bird Atlas was starting. So it was really good timing for me to get involved with that project. Let me just see if I can make sure this thing works. Did it go? Click on the slide. Click on the, sorry, click on this. I'm not seeing, are you seeing a cursor? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, now I've gone ahead a little bit. Anyway. Okay, there we go. All right, so spoiler alert for you guys who have not been around birding for 20 years, let alone 40 years. The third Pennsylvania Bird Atlas, that does imply we've had two before. So before I look forward to the third Pennsylvania Atlas and what that's going to be like, we'll say a little bit about the previous two and what we've learned about the birds in Pennsylvania over the last few decades using these bird atlases. So bird atlases have got a long history. There have been local atlases produced for more than 50 years now. The first large-scale atlases at the nation scale were in the UK, produced by an organization I used to work with called the British Trust for Ornithology. And now they've produced 3 bird atlases. The third one, Small World, was actually organized by my sister-in-law. The third one was not only the third breeding bird atlas, it was also the second winter bird atlas in the UK. And following shortly after the UK's lead, a lot of states in the US were producing their first atlases in the 1980s, second atlases about 20 years ago. So lots of states are now on that third generation bird atlas phase that we're now entering. Winter atlases, it's slightly different. Relatively few states in the US have done winter bird atlases. There are a few. The only one that I know that's actually been published as a book, and I might be wrong on this, is the Oklahoma Winter Bird Atlas. Maine have just wrapped up a winter bird atlas, and I say if Maine can do a winter bird atlas, then we can, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that going forward, okay? So we have these beautiful books. Deb mentioned them. The first Pennsylvania Atlas of Breeding Birds in Pennsylvania, Dan Browning, you all know Dan was the organizer and editor of that wonderful book. That was actually my leaving present when I left the British Trust for Ornithology in 2004. My colleagues in the UK bought me that book. Now long out of print, but the second atlas is still in print, and it was published here in State College by Penn State Press. And that is part of a handsome set of triplets. So I don't know if you guys all know this, but slightly after the Pennsylvania Bird Atlas project, there was an Ohio Bird Atlas project, a West Virginia Bird Atlas project, also published by Penn State, also with wonderful art by Julie Zickerfuss on the front cover. So they form this really beautiful, handsome set of volumes, and the Penn State Press still sell them, and they often have discounts on them. So if you're interested in birds in our surrounding states, then this is a really highly recommended. I will emphasize we don't get a cut. Although Dan and I were editors and authors on these publications, we don't get any royalties, so I don't feel guilty about promoting them. So I would go out and buy them. They're really, as Deb said, really essential tools. So a little bit about the second Pennsylvania Bird Atlas. It was basically a repeat of the first one. The first one was conducted in the mid-1980s, organized by Dan. And what happens, for those that aren't familiar with Bird Atlas projects, is the state's divided up into a load of what we call Atlas blocks, close to 5,000 of them. They're about 3 by 3 miles across, roughly 10 square miles, so pretty big chunks of land. And the idea is that over a period of 5 years, birders will go into these blocks, every single block, and basically do a lot of bird watching and come up with a list of breeding species in each block. That's in essence what bird atlases are aiming to do. So basically map the distribution of every species across the state at this pretty fine scale of these 3 by 3 mile blocks. In the second atlas, we generated pretty close to 1 million records. through the volunteer count effort, so a tremendous amount of data. And the big innovation in the second atlas was to do point count. So we had a field crew of professional ornithologists do some 34,000 point counts across the state, all roadside point counts, but I think that's still probably the biggest point count survey that's ever been conducted anywhere in the world in one period of time. And that was an important innovation that allowed us to not only map the distribution of species, but also get some idea of where they are most common, mapping their abundance. So I'll just quickly show you a few of the examples of the kind of things we found out. So the second generation bird atlases, when you do a bird atlas a second time, you're able to compare the information with what was gathered usually 20 years before, and look at how distributions have changed over that period of time. That's when things get really interesting and really useful in this time of rapid global change. So here's one of my favorite birds, the eastern meadowlark, and this is what happened between these two atlases. So we've got three different colors on here. Green is where eastern meadowlarks were found there. So each of these little squares is a 3 by 3 mile block. Green is where eastern meadowlarks were found in the 1980s and also in the second atlas in the early 2000s. The yellow areas, which probably don't show quite so well, are areas where meadowlarks were found in the 1980s, but were not found 20 years later. So that's indicating that that species has been lost from those areas. And conversely, the blue areas are areas where the meadowlark was found recently, but not in the 1980s. So kind of range expansion, if you like. So you can see from the eastern meadowlark here, a lot of loss in the southeast. So a lot of areas in the southeast of the state have lost meadowlarks over the last few decades. We have a lot of species that have gained. So again, this is between the first and second atlas. Climate change has been going on now for decades, if not centuries. Species have been moving north for a really long time. If you go back far enough, these species were pretty scarce in Pennsylvania. And between the 1980s and early 2000s, you can see lots of blue here in the Allegheny Highlands and northern parts of the state. This is where these species moved into between the 1980s and early 2000s, right? Big changes. That's just in 20 years. So for some of these changes to occur, some of these species are moving north or moving up slope by several miles, in some cases, each year. You know, that's pretty fast, pretty rapid changes going on, right? What we also found is a lot of northern species. So Pennsylvania is a really interesting place for bird atlases for lots of different reasons. But one of the reasons I think it's so interesting is that we're right on the southern limit of a lot of kind of boreal species distribution. So they're kind of found in Pennsylvania, and then they get more common as you go into New York and New England and Canada. And then we've got a bunch of southern species where we're right on the northern edge. So we're right at this interesting front in terms of where birds are moving to and from. And again, what we found last time is that a lot of northern species seem to have consolidated their range. They seem to have moved into new areas between the first and second atlases. Oops. So a lot of blue on the map for a lot of these northern species. And if you average these changes out, what we found is probably what we would have predicted. The northern species have moved further south on average. Maybe that's not what we would have predicted, actually. But a lot of these species have been expanding since the forest came back, you know, within the last 150 years. So we've probably seen the tail end of recolonization for some of these species. The species that are widespread, found everywhere in Pennsylvania, the median latitude, basically how far north and south their distribution is, didn't change very much. And then the southern species, so here we've got a group of, is that 27? I can't read my own slide from here. 27 species, on average, their range has moved north by several kilometers between these two atlas periods, okay? So we're able, through the work of 2,000 volunteers that participated in the second atlas, given their time, going out in the field, through this work, we're able to document some pretty amazing changes in Pennsylvania's birds over a pretty short period of time. It's not just climate change. Environmental changes are coming thick and fast and in very unpredictable ways. During the last Atlas period, for example, there was a lot of large defoliation events in our forests. This is a map of defoliation events during that Atlas period. A lot of this defoliation is by caterpillars that yellow-billed cuckoos really like to eat. So not surprisingly, when we look at the breeding bird survey population trend for Pennsylvania, the second atlas was at a real peak time for yellow-billed cuckoos because there was all of this defoliation going on and lots of tent caterpillars and things like that out there, gypsy moth, etc. So again, there's just so many environmental change happening. Now that in the second atlas, again, the really nice thing we were able to do is not just map the distribution of species, which is interesting, but for a lot of our common species, yeah, they're found pretty much everywhere, right across the state. But when we're able to map the abundance, you can see these kind of hot spots crop up. So a lot of these for the scarlet tanager are in the Ridge and Valley, for example. Some of those mountaintop forests that Scott just talked about, really important for scarlet tanager. So this is really important for conservation. We don't just need to know where species are, but we need to know where they are abundant, where they're doing well, right? Because that maybe is where we want to focus our conservation efforts. There's one thing you can guarantee in bird populations and that's that they're going to change. The one thing you can't guarantee is how predictably they're going to change. There's always unexpected things happening, which I think is one of the reasons that people that are really interested in bird populations find it so fascinating. So here, this is a breeding bird survey trend. So some of you may participate in the breeding bird survey. This is how we monitor bird population trends nationwide and at the state level. So this is a breeding bird survey population trend for the brown thrasher in Pennsylvania. So when the second atlas started in 2004, the brown thrasher had been declining for a really long time, along with a lot of other early successional species. And a lot of us probably thought around about that time that that might continue. A lot of us probably didn't predict this. You know, the brown thrashers bounced back. I have no idea why. Does anyone know why brown thrashers are doing better than they were 20 years ago? I really don't know. Yeah, they're moving into suburbia. I live in suburbia and we have brown thrashers in my yard. So they've adapted, right? Again, we wouldn't probably have predicted that 20 years ago. Things change. So here's the first atlas, the second atlas. So the third atlas over here, maybe we're going to find that that's a species that has actually expanded this time round. We'll have to do the fieldwork to find out. Black-throated blue warbler, that's one of these northern species, species that are found mainly in the northern tier, most common further north, along with Blackburnian warbler, blue-headed vireo, all of those cool species found mainly in the boreal forests. Again, when the second Pennsylvania Bird Atlas started in 2004, the black-throated green warbler had been doing amazingly well, right? And it had expanded since the previous atlas. Population, as shown by BBS, had shown that it had increased maybe about fourfold since the 1960s. Great news, right? And a lot of us probably thought, well, that's going to continue. They seem to be doing really well. Surprise. Probably not so much of a surprise. This is what happened, right? So during the second atlas, they really started to decline really very quickly. The population halved over just a period of a few years, according to BBS data in Pennsylvania. Again, big changes. I don't think anyone really knows why. You know, these are neotropical migrants. Might be something to do with things happening on their winter quarters, but things are changing. I recently looked at population trends. So there's a lot going on in here. Each of these little codes is a different species, right? So we've got ringneck pheasant, rock pigeon, yellow-billed cuckoo, etc. And then I've categorized them based on BBS data, trying to predict how much the populations would have changed between a second atlas and just forecasting a little bit forward to when the third atlas starts. So how much these populations have changed in about 20 years. So the ones in the middle, the 2024 population as a percentage of 2004 is around about 100. So that means there's not much change. The ones in green have increased. The ones in dark green have more than doubled in population in 20 years. A handful of species, including, you will notice here, BRTH, brown thrasher, red-bellied woodpecker, yellow-throated vireo. So a few species are doing really well. The sad news is there are a lot more on this side of that yellow line. And all of these species, the populations we're thinking now in Pennsylvania, these are all relatively common birds, are about half of where they were at the start of the second atlas. So I think we can anticipate some pretty big changes between the second atlas and the third atlas. This is from an article by Nick. Nick's here somewhere, isn't it? Nick does a great job of analyzing CBC and Winter Atlas survey data, and he's got an article in the latest edition of Pennsylvania Birds showing you winter population trends from Christmas bird counts, which I'm sure a lot of you participate in. And this is for the tufted titmouse. And again, talking about unexpected changes. 15 years ago, tufted titmice were everywhere, very common. No one thought that that's a species that might undergo decline, but they really did. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but I certainly did where I live. The population suddenly tanked a few years ago. And as Nick and other people have suggested, this is very likely due to West Nile virus. These things are coming thick and fast, diseases, invasive species, environmental change, and we just can't predict what the next ones are going to be. Who knows what's going to happen over the next 5 years of this upcoming bird atlas. Just to finish on looking back, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it looks like a few species are really getting knocked by avian flu. A lot of seabirds in different parts of the world have been really knocked back. Not a big problem here in Pennsylvania, obviously, but there are already indications that species like the black vulture is not as common as it was last year. And there have been reports of large mortality events of black vultures in a few areas over the last few months. So maybe avian flu is another of those things. It's, you know, another random event changing our bird populations in unpredictable ways. So looking forward to the third Pennsylvania Bird Atlas. First of all, since we did the last one, a lot of things have changed, including how we bird watch. And the biggest change, where have I put my phone? I've left my phone somewhere. Oh, it's right there. So the biggest change is that we all use these now. Most of us use these all the time when we're birding, right? We're using eBird. Just 20 years ago, when we had the second Pennsylvania Bird Atlas, smartphones weren't even a thing. So we weren't carrying around our checklist and our GPS units and everything in this wonderful little device. So we're doing things very differently now. And also since then, eBird was just starting to emerge around the time of the second atlas. And now it's pervasive, right? I'm sure most of you in this room use eBird. Now, eBird is incredible. I think it's just an amazing initiative. I use it literally every day. And there's some wonderful products being generated from this citizen science data. So Scott showed you some maps earlier for the wood thrush. There's incredible dynamic maps. This is awesome. So why do we even need a bird atlas if eBird's already producing these amazing maps? Well, I'll just show you why. So here's an incredible map for the black-throated green warbler showing its distribution in North America from eBird data. Beautiful map, very accurate when you look at that scale of North America. Unfortunately, if you zoom in a little bit, it's not so good, right? So I don't know how many of you live in the Philadelphia metro area, but that is certainly not black-throated green warbler habitat, right? So these maps are great for large scale, continental scale, but as you zoom in, the information in them, a lot of this is based on model data modeled for the whole of the US. It starts to fall apart a little bit as you zoom in to the kind of scale that we want for informing management and conservation in Pennsylvania. So I still think there's very much a need for bird atlases, and Cornell and eBird actually agree with that, by the way. Moving on, we have started this process to start the third Pennsylvania Bird Atlas. I had initial discussions with Dan about this a couple of years ago, and we've been moving things forward ever since. I hope I've not forgot anyone from this list. Please wrap my fingers. But we formed a steering committee a few months ago. Several people in this room, Deb, Dan, of course. So Dan was the organizer in the first atlas, the director in the second atlas, and like the god of the third atlas. He's like the atlas's son, father, and grandfather. So Greg, I understand, will be here. I think Vernon's here, and of course my wonderful advisor Margaret. So several people in the room are on this committee representing lots of different organizations. The atlas doesn't belong to one organization. PSO have been very supportive, but it doesn't belong to one organization. It's kind of a grassroots thing, really. So we've got, representatives of Powder Mill, Audubon, et cetera, on here. So this is a steering committee, and we've been meeting periodically over the last few months, pushing things forward. Now, again, this is not, the atlas doesn't belong to a single organization, but these two entities are going to be very crucial. First of all, the Pennsylvania Game Commission are going to be providing the vast majority of the funding, and it's already looking like incredibly generous funding for the next 6 or 7 years or so that this project will be moving forward. So we're really grateful for the Pennsylvania Game Commission for that. And the host organization this time around is going to be a wonderful name in conservation. It's got national recognition. Hawk Mountain is going to be the host organization. So the Atlas organizer is going to be formally an employee of Hawk Mountain this time around. So they're going to be two key players. One thing we've done over the last few months is we had a logo competition. Logos are really important. They give you instant recognition. We gave a lot of thought to what we needed in a logo this time. And because most people are going to be interacting with the Atlas through these, it needs to be something that looks good small, right? So we did think very carefully about this. And we had a competition which was organized and funded by PSO. Thank you, PSO. And we had some wonderful entries, and we decided on this one, which was basically we liked some elements of Dan Cassidy's design and some elements of Bobby Brown, so we got them to work together for this. So you'll notice the three on the right-hand side, the Delaware riverboard, kind of reflecting that Delaware River border. Why the tufted titmouse? Well, as we've already mentioned, it's a bird that the status is changing, right? So there is some interest there. It's a species where the male and female are the same. So very often, we choose a male, the brightly colored male of a species for logos. This is one where the female gets equal billing. It's something that's found in Pennsylvania, something that's found in Pennsylvania year round. And that's very important because we are talking about a winter and breeding bird atlas this time. And they're great little birds. They're recognizable. People have them in their yards. So it's not some obscure thing that only birders know about, right? So we think this is a really pleased with how the logo has come together. Other things that are ongoing, we have been interviewing for an Atlas organizer. So someone will be employed for the next 6 or so years to organize this bird atlas. And we have interviewed this week, and hopefully we'll have an announcement about that within a week or so. So we will hopefully have some exciting news on that front very soon. Something else we're hoping to do with this atlas is expand it to an atlas of life. This is going to be entirely optional. We really want this atlas to be something where people can be involved in it on all different levels. So if you just want to enter your bluebirds that you see in your yard, that's great. If you want to go out and do loads of bird counts, that's great. If you want to go out and do loads of bird counts and take photographs of plants and spiders and everything while you're out there, might as well, right? You're out there. Then we're going to have a portal in iNaturalist for you to submit data for everything else. And I think this is a really important next step. It's not formally part of the Bird Atlas. It's kind of going to be running concurrently with it. But we're going to be encouraging you to participate in this while you're out there. We already know why we do bird atlases. It's because we get people to places where they wouldn't otherwise go, right? get them to a lot of those forests, for example, in the northern tier, which are relatively unbirded. And the same is true of everything else. It's not just birds, but if you look at iNaturalist data here, so this is iNaturalist data for plants, for spiders, and I can't remember what's this one. Fungi, right? You can see, so these are by atlas blocks. So I got all the iNaturalist data, put them into atlas blocks, and there are huge tracts of Pennsylvania with no data, no citizen science data on these species in iNaturalist. So while we're out there, if you just casually see a spider or a fungi or something else, why not try and capture that data as well? Voluntary. No one's going to be forced to do any of this kind of stuff, right? We want to be very inclusive in this atlas. So how am I doing for time, Deb? I know we're a little bit, 10 minutes, okay. So just a few major innovations. We will be using an eBird portal. We did a survey and about 96% of people who responded to that survey. Some of you probably helped with that, right? We had about 250 people responded. 96% of them have an eBird account. Other states are using an eBird portal for their atlas, and it works really well. We're going to be doing, hopefully, a winter bird atlas, which is going to be a big new innovation. And the other major innovation in this one is we're going to try and do some volunteer point counts. Don't be intimidated. It's much easier than you might think. Again, we're trying to be inclusive with this atlas. So what does the eBird portal look like? Well, again, most of you are going to be out there in the field. Hopefully you have cell reception. Some places don't, sadly, but we're going to be entering data largely on our smartphones. And I actually live in Maryland. Sorry, I'm an interloper. I work in Pennsylvania, so I feel like I'm a Pennsylvanian. I live in Maryland, and we're in the 4th year of the 3rd generation bird atlas in Maryland. And we're using this eBird portal, and it works beautifully. It's really good. So one thing we're going to be really wanting to do is put those breeding codes in. So we're going to have to get used to these breeding codes and start to use them a lot more. Anyone who's using eBird can, of course, use them. But we really want people to use them all the time when they're doing their bird atlasing. This is a critical part of a bird atlas. It's one thing is a bird in a place. It's a different thing if you can show there's actually breeding there. The eBird portal will have all the blocks in there. So if I'm birding in this block, which I happen to live in, oops, I'm giving away my address here. So this yellow area is the block that I live in. I do a lot of birding locally. All those blue dots are my local, where I've submitted checklists. It tells you what block you're in. And the really cool thing, they brought this out last summer, is it tells you if you've wandered close to or over a block boundary. I mean, that's great, right? Those of you who have experienced doing bird atlasing in the past, trying to pull up paper maps to work out which block you're in, we don't have to do that anymore if you're using the eBird app. In fact, I have a smartwatch connected to my phone, and my watch buzzes if I go near, if I have my checklist open. I can't ignore that. I could possibly ignore my phone, but I can't ignore my vibrating watch. So and I think that's awesome. That's really, really helpful, making sure that things going to the right, that our observations going to the right block. So I think the eBird portal is wonderful. I can't say enough about it. The other really nice thing about this is the data capture is going to be so much better than before, because you are when you go out birding, when you go out atlasing, you're inputting lots and lots of checklists, and eBird records where that checklist is. It's not just somewhere within this 10 square miles. It actually puts a precise location on it. So we're going to get so much better data than we got in the second atlas. I don't want to diss the second atlas, by the way. I think it's pretty darn good. But the third one's going to be even better. So this is just looking around the area where I live in Maryland. These are all the Louisiana water thrush observations you can see in a lot of these blocks. There are lots and lots of observations. Really fine scale habitat. We'll be able to do some really fine scale habitat analysis because we've got all of this really precise location data. It's not just one dot in the middle of a big block. It's so much more than that. So that's Louisiana water thrush. You can see that all there on what we call Catoctin Mountain, blue grosbeak, all in the nearby farmland. So this is going to be awesome. In terms of using these data, in terms of habitat management, in terms of conservation, I think this is so much better. This is going to allow us to do things at the scale we really need to do them. It's going to tell us the scale of land ownership and habitat patches where things are, not just these 3x3 mile blocks. So I think this is all going to be really exciting stuff. This is for one of my atlas blocks. This is what the Maryland Bird Atlas organizer is producing for every single block, every few months, updating you on information, how you're progressing in terms of the different targets for the block, where you've done your birding. I clearly don't like birding very much in the forest, right? What times of the year you've done your atlasing, what species you're missing from the previous atlases. I've actually got a lot of these now. So again, this is really good information to feed back to Atlas volunteers so they can really target species and target particular places within each block. So I think these third generation, if you did this first or second bird atlas and loved it, I think you're going to love this one even more. The winter atlas, very quickly. Again, I think this is really exciting. We don't have any illusions that we're going to get to every single block. It's a slog in winter, right? Daylight hours are limited. There's a lot of bad weather. There's a lot less time to actually get out there and do birding in the winter. But if we can get a really good sample of timed counts across the state, exactly how we do that is yet to be determined. The new Atlas organizer is going to have a big stake in how these things move forward. But I think we've got a lot to learn. We've had 2 breeding bird atlases already. We know a lot about our breeding birds. We know a lot less about our birds outside of the breeding season. And just as an example, this is a yellow-bellied sapsucker, a map of eBird records in winter for 5 winters recently. That does not resemble where yellow-bellied sapsuckers are in winter. What is it a map of? Just basically where birders are, right? So, look, here's State College, right? Central Pennsylvania. We know there are a lot of birders here. They see a lot of sapsuckers, but what about all of these other places? There's got to be sapsuckers out there, but no one's really birding much in those areas in winter. So I think it's going to be pretty exciting to add a winter component to this atlas. Volunteer point counts. We are probably going to do something like just have 4 counts per block. We'll give you some guidance about where they should be. Try and get like 1 in each quadrant of the block, so 1 kind of in each quarter. And all it will be is a 6-minute stationary count in eBird. It's not going to be anything more sophisticated than that. So just do an eBird checklist for 6 minutes, and then we'll have incredible abundance data potentially from that. We're hoping people will get off the road a little bit with these counts if they can. Again, still some details to work out from that, but we're hoping this is something that's going to be pretty easy. Not everyone will want to do it. Some people might think they can't do it. That's fine. This is going to be a big open house, this atlas. Some people will be really into this, people like me. The really nerdy birders would love this, and maybe we'll do lots, and some people might not want to do it, and that's fine. I'm just going to move on because we're nearly out of time here. In terms of organization, again, for those of you who remember the last atlas, we had these atlas regions that were based on pages in a paper map, an atlas, right? That's antiquated. People don't use those much anymore. So like most states, we will be switching to probably, again, to be determined, probably switching to organization by county, or maybe groups of counties in some instances. And we're also proposing that we have some sort of regional organization. So we have a regional organizer, maybe 6 or 8. This is just one idea how we break the state up. That's, again, yet to be determined. But we'll have a regional organizer who kind of oversees, maybe about 10 county organizers. We think that'll make the overall Atlas organizer's job a little bit easier. They are going to have more to do this time, right? They've got a winter atlas to organize as well. So we're trying to get kind of a bit more support for them from all of the hardworking volunteers. Timeline, last slide. We are hoping to open the Atlas portal on the 1st of January 2024. It's going to come around very quickly. There's a chance it might be delayed by a month or 2 for the breeding season. That's fine. There's not much to report in January or February anyway. So the main Atlas breeding season is going to be kind of March through till August every year. We'll be having point counts, professional point counts like we did last time in the middle of every breeding season. And then the Winter Atlas, the first season of the Winter Atlas will starts not this coming winter, but the winter after. That gives the organizer a little bit more time to get the breeding season part organized and then do the winter part afterwards. So it's going to be more like a 5.5-year project than a 5-year project. So that's what we're proposing for the timeline. And it's fast approaching, guys. So what we're going to be doing over the next few months, of course, is we're going to be reaching out to people. The really important component moving forward is going to be getting those county and regional organizers. I'm looking around this room and seeing a lot of people who could, maybe should, step up and do some of that work. That's a really important part of this volunteer-driven effort. So expect a lot more updates, a lot more communication about this. Over the next few months, we'll start to have a social media presence, start to send newsletters out and things like that. And I'm pretty excited about it. I hope you are too. And I look forward to everyone in this room participating. Everyone can contribute. So thank you. Yep, happy to answer any questions. Yep, Dave. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep. So Dave's question was about Birds of the World Online. I don't know if any of you have used that resource. It is incredible. It's an incredible, for every species, it's almost like an encyclopedia for every species, right? So it's an incredible resource. And we can certainly ask Cornell whether that's something we can give Atlas coordinators. I don't know. I do know that you get access to that if you submit a certain number of eBird checklists. So if you go out and do a lot of atlasing, you will get access privileges. So yeah. But yeah, it's a wonderful resource. Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Great question. Yeah. So the question is whether you're entering data for an individual bird or for an entire trip. It's somewhere between those. So one thing we're going to really try and impress on people this time is that short distance and short duration checklists are what you should be doing. If you go to a block and spend 8 hours and potentially drive 50 miles, it's easy to do actually, drive 50 miles around a block in a day. We have no idea where those birds are, right? So point counts are great, but obviously pretty limited, but point counts are short traveling counts are going to be the best way forward. So incidental ones, no, so we're going to encourage stationary counts and traveling counts that are short distance and any incidental records as well. I do submit a lot of incidental records. So things like if I'm driving around and I see a brood of wild turkey that I might not otherwise see in that block, then absolutely I'm going to enter that incidental record. But I think the main thrust is going to be encouraging people to do short duration and short distance counts, because then we know that everything they're recording is where that checklist location is on the map, right? Rather than maybe 2 or 3 miles away. So great question. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. Yep, Deb. We have not defined short yet. That's something we need to work on. But one reason, so these volunteer point counts will likely be 6 minutes. So that's going to be one thing we do. Hopefully we'll get 4 of those in every block. And the reason we've chosen 6 minutes is because that's how long the professional point counts are. So we're going to be able to hopefully compare the two. If you're doing a stationary count, if you stay much more than about 10 minutes, all you're doing, unless there's migration going on, is seeing the same birds over and over again, right? So it's not very efficient. And then in terms of distance, again, we'll probably encourage something like half a mile and then maybe start a new checklist, that kind of thing. Again, to be decided, and you're going to be one of the people helping us decide that. Yeah. Yep.
That might be a short Well, that would inform point guess.
Yeah.
But in atlasing, you don't want to skip habitat, you know, so.
Yeah.
But maybe I have a long, that would be a couple of that. We'll provide some guidance.
Yeah. Yeah, Doug.
Answer thoughts for education and workshops.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I find that that's something really lacking.
Yep, yep, good question, Doug. So Doug's asked about the education element and how we're going to basically train people to change the way they bird. And absolutely, that's going to be a really important part of the organizer's job, is get those training materials, organize training workshops. And for sure, sign of the times, we'll have a lot of videos and maybe, you know, Zoom get-togethers and things like that. That's just the easy way to do things these days. But yeah, absolutely, training materials is going to be a big part of the organizer's job, is to get all of that stuff up and running. Very important. Thanks. Anyone else? Well, I think we're overdue for a social hour, right? So thank you.
Thank you all. Let's give a round of applause to the excellent presentations this afternoon. Just a few